Hello SGBers, I'm Companion Wolf. Welcome to another Smile Game Builder tutorial. There haven't been any tutorials for 3 weeks, I'm afraid, for two simple reasons. The first, as many of you know, is I've been working on my game Otherworld Through the Veil for SGB, and this has taken up a lot of time. I showcased it briefly already, so for anyone who's interested, I'll put the link to the video below. The second is work. My shifts have been a bit scattered throughout the weeks, so most of the days off were spent sleeping and catching up on some sleep debt. And I've also just been chillaxing with Skyrim, because when you hate your job with a passion, as I do mine, it's very, very draining. So your days off become your positive sanctuary. Skyrim is that place for me. Unfortunately, for tutorials and projects, when you're completely immersed in something you enjoy, all of your time management is thrown out of the window and time evaporates, and the next thing you know, the entire week is gone and it's time to go back to work. Anyway, for the next few tutorials after this one, I'll revisit some of the older ones. The plan is to update the older techniques to some better ones, particularly doors. In fact, that'll merit entire tutorial in itself. I'd also like to start concluding some of the multi-part tutorials I started, including chests and pictures, kind of like tying up some loose ends, so then we can move on to the next ones. In this tutorial, however, I'm delving into the battle system. Not so much the actual battles themselves, as I've already touched upon that a few times, and besides, most people are familiar with it. Much of this may be common knowledge and logical, but I'll go through each relevant section nevertheless, because there are some areas that people may not be aware of, and it's just a couple of pointers, things that I have found out myself. This tutorial won't include creating the graphics themselves, just the battle system itself as a whole and its relevant component parts, pretty much from start to finish. So after the intro, I'll dive straight in. The first place we're visiting is the Battle tab in Edit Game Data. Although I covered this in a previous tutorial, I'll mention it briefly here. You have two types of battles in the battle system, 2D and 3D. By now everyone is probably familiar with these two modes, and probably also favors one over the other, depending on the style of game you're going for. I personally do prefer the 3D mode. With 2D, obviously the camera movement will be disabled because you don't need it. It's just your typical Final Fantasy or RPG Maker style flat screen static battles. With 3D mode, you can change the camera modes. Again, I won't go into it as it's all fairly self-explanatory, and then with a bit of experimenting you will find the settings and the angles you prefer for your game. And by the way, don't forget to save the settings here so that you can tweak them for different parts and then reuse them. The next part is characters and monsters. So starting with the characters, the stats are for the most part fixed. These are base rates, so their relevance in battles are how much damage you can take, how many spells you can cast or skills you can use, your base damage, which also affects weapons and skills values, how much incoming damage is reduced by, and the likelihood of dodging attacks and presumably fleeing from combat. The default values are the starting values for level 1 characters, so if I go through each one of them, you can actually see that they do reflect whatever is in there at level 1. They're exactly the same. The increased value is the amount that each of the stats is increased by when leveling up. And finally, growth type is like a variation modifier. For those familiar with RPG Maker, it's like the parameter curves, only not quite as fine-tuned. As you can see, there are 5 options to choose from, and depending on which one you select, the growth type will add a different value to different levels. Let's change HP to 5 to make it easier to demonstrate, because 5 is a nice number. And with the growth type set to normal, it'll just add that increased value each time without any variations. Acceleration will generally add a variant of the increased number every few levels, and conversely, slow down generally skips adding anything every few levels. So let's start with normal, and then as you can see, it'll just simply add that number without variation. If we then set it to acceleration, you'll see that the HP's growth type increases, and then at level 6 it adds 1, and then it'll continue at level 8, and so on and so on and so on. And that's the variation. Likewise with, say, slowdown, it'll skip a few and basically slow it right down so that the numbers are added. You can use decimals too for growth. SGB won't show them, as it tends to ignore decimals or rounds them off, but they still work in the background here. If we set HP to 1.5 and normal growth type, you'll see it adding the numbers to it. Level 2 shows it as 41, but it is in fact 41.5. So for level 3 it should be 43, because the 0.5 is added, and so on. And that's how SGB's own parameter curve works. Very simple and very straightforward. The next relevant part, I guess, would be the commands. You can change them around a bit and add some more, but there are actually very few actual options. Incidentally, you can customize the commands, and these will show up in the battle command area. So double click on the command name and enter a new name. Let's change Scion skills to something like talents, and these will show up. And you can also change the icons to something again. Double click and then select an icon. Thus you can have a different one for each class, like a sword for warriors, or the staff for magic users, and so on and so on. And of course, since you can also import your own, you'll have a much wider selection of icons. Anyway, in this section there are 2 commands I'd like to touch upon, and that is charge and guard. Guard allows characters to miss a turn to defend against incoming attacks, so the damage is reduced by the set amount. So since the default is 50%, as this is a percentage, after guarding, all damage directed at the character in the next round will be halved. Similarly, with charge, the character misses a turn to build up their attacks for the next round. Damage is then calculated based on a combination of the character and weapon stats and so on, and then with the set percentage amount tacked on. This is based on level. Otherwise, I'm sure characters at level 1 would be capable of some supercharged 1-kill hits, and that's not very realistic. You can change this to anything you like, depending on your preference. For monsters, everything is again fairly straightforward, but I'll go through it. In the list of monsters, there aren't any distinctions between 2D and 3D monsters. They're all sort of bundled in together. So if you're competent with 3D creation programs such as Blender, then you can pretty much replace all of these 2D images with your own 3D ones. And then they'll all show up here. In the basic settings, the monster stats are pretty much the same as the characters and work in the same way. Monsters have 2 additional stats: evasion, which is dodging attacks and skills directed at them, and accuracy, which is obviously how accurate they are and how likely their hits and skills are to connect. Because they're both percentages, the higher these values are, the greater the chances of success. On a side note, with stats for both characters and monsters, these are fixed. You can't customize your own stat formula. You have to just use these fixed values. That said, it is entirely possible to use variables and advanced variables to create customized formula in the action battle system events. However, I found this method to be quite convoluted and perhaps a little more cumbersome than I'd like it to be, and that's why I haven't made a tutorial on the ABS I created yet. Anyway, monster behavior is where you can change how monsters behave in battles and how they appear. Behavior is like the monster's AI, where normal will go through the list of battle actions at random. Wise doesn't use skills if MP is low, and my favourite is Wily, where the monsters target badly injured characters. You can also alter these settings in the Action in Battle tab, which I'll go through shortly. Spawn pattern defines how monsters appear in battle. This is based on the groups of spawning monsters that you have in the map settings. Always alone is for single or rogue monsters, or maybe for bosses. You can have the same monsters types with horde of the same. This won't mix. It'll basically, if you had 3 slimes, then 3 slimes only will appear. And with mixed horde, you can mix and match from the list of monsters in the map settings. Monsters' resistances are obviously how weak or strong they are against the various elements and status effects. These again are fixed and can't be changed in the editor. Having said that, you can use let me show you quickly. You can use the localization tools in utilities, where all of the game settings, variables, switches and events, etc. are logged. You can then export it as a text file, probably make some changes and then import it into SGB again. To be honest, I haven't really gone into this part, so my knowledge of this is nil. Maybe I will for future reference. I'll play around with that and then go through it. So with resistances, you can set the various percentages, which are all very straightforward, but you can also type in a percentage of your own. So say, logically this one would be, we could set it to say 60%. It should be minus 60%. And what? That's right, it should be minus 60%. That's a bit weird. Minus. No, it doesn't like that. So what you need to do is you need to type in the number first and then put the negative sign for the resistances. Anyway, this will only accept numbers, and if you type in anything else, that's what's going to happen. Just remember that when you're setting negative numbers, type the number first and then the negative, because otherwise it'll do some strange things. Okay. Action in battle shapes the actions each monster does in battle. In addition to the actions used by characters, monsters have a few more, like critical, which forces a critical hit, otherwise presumably it'll rely on its internal stat conditions. Idle is the next one, in which the monster does nothing, just waits and thinks, if it's even capable of thinking. And the final one is escape. Obviously the more cowardly or weaker monsters will try to flee when they're close to death. And as with characters, the chance percentage for defend and charge are the same. They can also be changed. The HP lower and upper parts is evidently the HP range before monsters take those actions. Turns is tied in with the other conditions, HP range and monster behaviors. If these are all set to 0, then they're randomly activated if the monster behavior is set to normal, and generally speaking it'll go through each action and activate on specific turns, or if each of these conditions is met. So for instance, if the first one is set to, we'll go turn 1 with an HP, what? Oh, okay, I forgot about that. Really cool thing about it is if you do set the turns, then it'll automatically move it down to the bottom for easier reference. So in turn 1, let's put the HP range in between 5 and say 20, and then with an action type would be set to escape. This action will then only be relevant if the monster's HP is between that range, otherwise it'll just skip through regardless of the turn. If you have multiple turns of the same number, those actions will be randomized each turn, and only one is used for that turn, provided there are no other conditions like this one. If HP is 20 or above, it'll attack, and then if it goes 20 or below, then on this turn it will try to escape. As it says at the bottom here, it'll cycle through these turns, resetting once it reaches the maximum number of turns. So if you have like attack on turn 2, it'll go through turn 1, turn 2, and then it'll reset to 0. So whatever is in here will come first, and then it'll go through each one again. It's all quite logical, really. I mean, it might take some time to setting all of it up to balance the game. I did spend a good few hours going through this section, tweaking the monster stats and battle actions for Otherworld SGB. Everything follows a logical sequence, but timing is just as important when you're going through this. I don't think I have any completely randomized actions. It's mostly turn-based randomness for Otherworld. Next is spawning monsters on maps. Again, this is straightforward, but for the sake of completeness, I'm including this in the tutorial. Now, in the battle settings for each map, you can change the various options. These apply to the entire map, not specific areas of the map, because SGB can't do that. Footsteps is the actual number of steps taken before the monster groups, selected at random from the spawning monsters' attacks. With the spawning monsters section, you can have as many monsters as you deem fit. I'm not actually sure if there's a limit. Technically, you could probably add as many as you want to, provided you have all of the monsters, because if you already added a monster, it won't be duplicated. I added 13, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 12, 13. Yep, I added 13. And it's rather cool that it shows them in columns rather than a list. I like this way of doing things. The spawning monsters will be mixed and matched randomly, depending on the spawn patterns in monster behaviors. The more you have, the more monsters will appear. So the maximum simultaneous spawns is the number of monsters in battle at the same time. It's limited to a maximum of 6, which is a good thing, because for one, anything more than that probably won't fit on the screen, and secondly, more powerful monsters will mob your party and annihilate it. So the battle test, it randomized, and you have this one which is set to a boss anyway, so it's obviously going to be solo. If we test it again, hopefully it'll have something a little bit more mixed. And there you have it. See, this is set to same for the monster behavior, for the end of the monster behavior, so all of these will appear. For the battle background, it depends on whether you have 2D or 3D battle mode on, which really goes without saying. With 2D battle mode, you can select the flat backgrounds from the list, and with the 3D battle mode, this is the actual map. The actual map will be used. Battles will always take place in the center of the map and can't be changed. You can kind of change the position of the game data's battle camera movement with the start and end point settings, but this is a global effect. The center point will always remain the same. If you unselect it, it'll disable the background completely, and you'll just have a flat non-3D static background using the default instead. There won't be any 3D elements in it at all. I'm not sure when you'd use this, but it might have some relevance to certain areas. And it goes without saying that you can also have battle music. I like that you can choose your own or use the system one as well. System one is set in somewhere in the edit game data, and I believe it's under sound and music. I also like that you can use an additional environmental sounds too. It can certainly add a lot more dimension and effect to the battle. In Otherworld, I've been experimenting with more relevant monster sounds as the environment sounds for each map, although I'll probably discard that later. Anyway, the final part is place event. I already went through this in several previous tutorials, but the most relevant part I wanted to focus on is specifically the monster position. A few of my own thoughts on it as well. So I'll quickly set up some events where you have a slime, direwolf, goblin, and then let's say hornet. And then when we go into the monster position, you can drag these around for the monsters to be in specific positions. So the slime and the goblin can be in the front rows. Direwolf can be in the second row, and then a hornet can be at the back. So now if we battle test, you can see the positions of the monsters, but it's kind of clumped together with the 2D images, and this is where the camera angle might come into play to change perspective to something maybe a bit more overhead so you can see it more clearly. I'm not actually sure if monster positions has any direct impact on attacks. It doesn't seem that it does, so it may be more for aesthetics, like layer aesthetics. Now, as another example, if we change 1 and 3 to alien, these are some 3D graphics. 2 and 4 to drone, like so, and then we add another alien to number 5. The positions are already set. Like so. Now if we battle test it, I forgot to close that one. Oh, I changed that one to drone instead. It doesn't matter, it still gives you the perspective and it looks much better. Incidentally, both of these, the alien and drone graphics, were created by Jacob Mann. I'll put his links up in the description below. And change that. Let's go yeah, there you go. Drones in front and the aliens, and as you can see, it looks much better. And Mother didn't tell you that lightning and fire will kill you. So my final thoughts on the battle system as a whole is it's pretty good as it is, regardless if you use 2D or 3D modes. It just depends on preference and how you want your game to look and feel. For me though, I'd have to say, think about your design first. If you're going for a 3D effect and using the default monster graphics, they can look a bit odd in a 2D environment at certain angles, and incorrect positioning, as we've seen, can make the battle look clumsy. If you're going for 2D monster graphics, I'd recommend you use the 2D battle style, but if you're able to create 3D models, then use the 3D battle style. That way it's consistent throughout the game. SGB is designed with a 3D system in mind, so it can be as simple as finding the right balance between the two. But there's no harm in having a 3D environment in which to explore, and then you have 2D static battles, because it's like that contrast between the two. The battle system does need some tweaking, notably with customizable battle formula and specifically being able to change certain elements like the values within SGB, but in my opinion the system in place is just fine. It does what it's supposed to. The main focus of the game is gameplay, storyline and environment, and the battles are secondary or optional, but that's just my opinion. Many people have asked for an action battle system. Yes, this is entirely possible with SGB's current setup. As I already mentioned, I have created an ABS, a basic one admittedly, and while it's fully functional, it's very involved and convoluted with so many elements and so many components at times. It's hard to keep track of what's what and what does what. However, with a little patience, dedication and determination, it can be done. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial. If you have any questions about battles or SGB as a whole, or suggestions for future tutorials, write them in the comments below and I'll add them to the list and look into them for the future. In the meantime, if you found this video useful, give it a like and subscribe for more videos. Each one is greatly appreciated and gives the incentive for me to make more. You can visit my Twitter and Facebook and the SGB subsite for updates. All the links are below. That's it for another tutorial. Thanks for watching. Until the next time.